Chapter 2. The Growth of the Abbey. Part 1. The Colonies. The goodness of the brethren made a deep impression upon the community. Turbulent and cruel as were the times, there was, nevertheless, some attention paid to the voice of conscience. It is true that this voice commonly made itself heard after the event, and served rather to reproach men than to deter them. But it did speak, and men listened. The deeds which they did were incredibly bad, but after they had done them, and the fierce heat of passion had died down, they were both sorry and afraid. Then they remembered that, quote, "the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much," end quote. Doubting the value of their own prayers, they looked about for righteous men to make intercession for them. God sat on his throne like the king, and had his court about him, part of angels, part of saints in glory, and part of holy persons still in the flesh. The sinner's hope of success in his petition lay in the securing of the kindly offices of some of these influential courtiers, and these were to be found most readily on earth in monasteries. Accordingly, these companies of praying men seemed, even to the sinners of the neighborhood, to be engaged in an important and essential business. If the sinner had money enough, he engaged a group of them to pray for him in particular. He built a monastery, and established them in it for that necessary purpose. Thus Ralph de Merly, chancing on his travels to spend a day at the abbey, and there beholding the pious conversation of the brethren, made up his mind, from what he saw, that these were the kind of men to have influence with God, and being in need of friends at that court, he asked the abbot to let him have some of them pro redemptione animae suae. This was the first colony which went out from Fountains. The year was 1137. The knight took the monks into his castle at Morpeth, in whose neighborhood he presently built them a monastery, which they called Newminster. The abbot of this new brotherhood was the Robert who had come from Whitby to take the place of the inconstant Gervase after the flight from York. A good man, modest in his bearing, gentle in his conversation, bearing rule with mercy, and at last enrolled in the honorable list of the saints. The abbey, like the mother house, was built beside a little river, and its 3 daughters, Pipwell, Sawley, and Roche, sat likewise, in the true Cistercian manner, on the banks of narrow streams. In the next year another nobleman, Hugh of Tatchell, in Lincolnshire, resolved to establish a Cistercian house, and sent to Abbot Richard for advice and monks from Fountains, and founded Kirkstead Abbey on the river Witham. At the same time, the Bishop of Lincoln asked the abbot for more men, the 2 companies of colonists leaving Fountains on the same day, and settled them, after some wandering, at Louth Park. Their abbot was the Geoffrey who forsook his companions at the bishop's and went back to St. Mary's, to return in deep penitence, who was thus assured of their entire confidence in him. In 1145, Hugh de Bolbec, for the redeeming of his sins, begged for the services of the Brethren of Fountains, and an abbey was built at Woburn. In 1146, the Bishop of Bergen came to Fountains, and his heart was set on having a Cistercian house in Norway. 13 brethren were found to brave the sea and the unknown land. Thus was erected the monastery of Lysacloster, the Abbey of the Valley of Light. One of the Ralphs of the original settlement was the abbot. In the library of Corpus Christi College, Oxford, is a manuscript life of St. Olaf, which was once among the books of Fountains. It is bound with other manuscripts in the skin of a seal. Ralph came back after many laborious years to spend his last days in the mother house. He may have brought with him this memento of the Norway mission. It is pleasantly told of him in the narrative that he used to sleep a good deal in his old age, and that the Lord sent a prompting angel to awake him when he slept too long. Si somno forsitan per noctes diutius indulgeret, eum excitaret. The next year, 1147, saw 3 colonies go out from Fountains. Henry de Lacy of Pontefract Castle, having meditated upon his misdeeds during a long illness, vowed that he would build a Cistercian house to the honor of the Virgin Mary. Its tenants were Fountains men, under the abbacy of Alexander, another of the founders. They had many troubles, some on account of the climate, some on account of their neighbors. Serlo, our narrator, was one of them, and might have made his story longer had he chose. It is from another record that we learn that Alexander objected to the nearness of the parish church, whose services distracted the attention of his monks, and for the sake of peace and quiet pulled the building down in spite of the parishioners. The parish appealed to the Archbishop of York, then to the Pope, but the monks prevailed in both courts. The neighborhood, however, was naturally hostile thereafter, and presently the abbot found a more convenient situation, where they built Kirkstall Abbey. 5 days after the departure of these brothers from the gates of Fountains, another company went, at the petition of the Earl of Albemarle, to found the Abbey of Vaudet, the house of the Valley of God. The monk Adam, who had been architect of the buildings at Kirkstall and Woburn, and was now in charge of the monks at Vaudet, found that the Earl of Albemarle was disposed to do yet more. He had once vowed, for his sins, to go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and had never gone, and now was old and fat and could not go. This, as Adam faithfully reminded him, was a serious matter, but it could be made right. If the Earl would build another abbey, Adam promised that his order would persuade the Pope to take that good work as an equivalent. The promise was performed through the kindly offices of St. Bernard, and the Earl told Adam to choose a suitable site. The monk accordingly looked about this way and that in Holderness, where the Earl's lands lay. It was the country which the Conqueror had bestowed upon Odo, his brother-in-law. The son of Odo, the Earl's father, had complained of its sterility, saying that it gave him only oaten bread to eat. But presently at Mow, some 4 miles east of Beverley, Adam came upon a fair hill, which by prophetic coincidence had been named St. Mary's Mount. Woods were growing all about, with open lands which promised good harvests, and streams running through them. There he thrust his staff into the ground, and cried, quote, "Verily this place shall be called the house of the heavenly King." End quote. And there the monastery was built, in spite of the reluctance of the Earl, who had already selected the place for a park. The first abbot was the enterprising Adam. This was in 1150. Thus, within a space of less than 20 years, St. Mary of Fountains had become the mother of 8 fair daughters. Meanwhile, the Cistercian order had been growing at some such rate as this in many other places. Too fast and too far, they feared at Clairvaux. In 1152, The General Chapter discouraged the founding of new monasteries. After that, no more colonies went out from Fountains.